Hey guys, this episode kicks off a 3-part exploration of the Supergirl series from the late 90s and early 2000s. This week we'll be talking about issues 1 through 50, aka the Earthborn Angel saga. On Friday, in a special bonus episode, we'll be discussing issues 51 through 74, aka the Linda Danvers Era. And then next Tuesday, we will tackle Many Happy Returns, the famed final arc of the series from issues 75 through 80 that temporarily returned the Pre-Crisis Kara Zor-El. Now, one of the things that you're going to hear across all 3 of these episodes is my refrain of justice for Linda Danvers. Now, interestingly, after we recorded all of these episodes, we got a very intriguing update by current Supergirl writer and artist Sophie Campbell on social media. Issue 14 of her Supergirl series releases on June 10th, 2026. And when the final cover was posted, it included the text Matrix Returns. Now, let's not get too excited, because Sophie Campbell took to Blue Sky to say this: the Matrix Returns text was added without my knowledge. This is not Matrix. It's Kara with a new costume, and Matrix does not appear in this issue. Yes, the image is an homage to Grummet's famous Matrix drawing, and it was intentional foreshadowing, but I'm sorry for the misleading way it was done. But, Sophie Campbell adds, that said, Matrix will return, I promise. Now, what exactly does this mean? Are we talking just the protoplasmic Matrix entity? Are we talking about the merged Matrix Linda Danvers Earthborn Angel? Or are we talking about Linda Danvers herself, the version of the character who was flying around in the Superman the Animated Series costume? All of this remains to be seen. I'm excited. I think the book is in great hands with Sophie Campbell, and whichever direction she's excited to pursue, I'm excited to read. What I will say, and you will hear this come up in these next few episodes, I do genuinely feel that where Peter David and DC left Matrix specifically, I'm content. I'm content with where May's journey ends, and we'll talk about that when we discuss issue 74 of this series. However, I think where there's a lot of work to be done and justice to be had, it's with respect to Linda Danvers herself. And just to be clear, when I say Linda Danvers, I don't mean the civilian persona of Kara Zor-El. I mean the specific independent Linda Danvers character from the Peter David series. I know, it gets a little complicated. As you listen to all of these episodes, we'll break it all down and hopefully make it clear. In any event, there's a lot that remains to be seen as far as what exactly this Matrix return will entail and when and how it will play out, but I'm excited, and the timing is extremely serendipitous that we're doing these episodes right as we're getting these teases. So it seems at least some of what we are talking about and clamoring for in these episodes will come to pass in some way, shape, or form. And you know, when that happens, we'll be here to talk about it. But in the meantime, I hope you enjoy this episode and our next couple of episodes all about this Peter David Supergirl series. Welcome to Digging for Kryptonite, a Supergirl fan journey. I'm your host, Anthony Desiato. Joining me to discuss the 50-issue Earthborn Angel saga, written by the late, great Peter David and drawn by pencilers Gary Frank and Leonard Kirk, is Supergirl aficionado and blogger Dr. Ange. Welcome to the show.
I can't thank you enough for inviting me specifically to talk about this. It's not Kara Zor-El, but it might be the best long-form Supergirl story sort of out there. And so I'm eager to talk about this.
I'm very excited to compare notes. We've been building up to this for a while. I had a magnificent time with my reading project. I can't wait to compare notes. But on the note of you being this Supergirl blogger, I want to shout out your site, Supergirl Comic Box Commentary. I want to thank you for it because it's been a great resource for me, especially as I've been catching up, for example, on the Sophie Campbell series. Now, I've been able to pick up on a lot of the pre-crisis callbacks because of the Silver and Bronze Age reading that I've done, but every now and then, someone pops up and I'm like, I'm not quite sure who this is. Ange will know, and Ange will have it in his review, and you never disappoint. Do you want to tell folks about the blog and how long you've been doing it? I'm so curious.
Yeah, it's hard to believe, but we are approaching 17 years of that site. Started back in 2009, and it was at a time that we were sort of relatively early, probably within the first 2 years of the Kara Zor-El reboot. And I kind of didn't like the direction that they were going with her, and I sort of felt that like her character was overlooked and that the past was sort of being overlooked. She's a great character. And so I said, I'm just going to start a blog where I start talking about really her mythos, old stories. It wasn't compendium or issue by issue, it was kind of by flavor. And we're just reviewing the current issues that were going out and really going back. And it's just been a wonderful escape for me, a way for me to really highlight this character that I love in all of her incarnations. So this, the Matrix Supergirl is as big a part of the site as the Kara Zor-El stuff, both post crisis, all of those eras.
Yeah, that's one of the things that's become clear in following you on social media and reading your reviews is that you do have love for these multiple incarnations of the character. And that's not always the case, right? Sometimes people are so married to one particular interpretation that then it becomes difficult when the stories go in a different direction. So for some who loved the pre-crisis Kara Zor-El, maybe they bumped up against the Matrix version, or those who loved Matrix didn't love it when Kara Zor-El came back. But it's very awesome and refreshing and pleasantly surprising that you have been able to access these multiple different versions.
Yeah, it's all about story, right? And so if it's a good story, I'm going to love it. If it honors the what I think is sort of the core of the character, I'm going to really like it. And I feel that you covered it a lot. We can talk a little bit about the Matrix stories before this run, um, and and this was oh, she is definitely a hero in this. She's going through a journey in this. We're going to reach a destination in this, honoring a lot. Peter David was a huge Supergirl fan, so honoring a lot of what came before.
Yeah, absolutely. So, like I said, I had the best time with this reading project. For this episode, we are going to be talking about those first 50 issues of the Supergirl series that started in 96 and ran all the way through 2003. It ran a total of 80 issues. Now we're going to drop a bonus installment at the end of this week on issues 51 through 74. And then next week, we're going to do a dedicated episode on the final arc of the series, Many Happy Returns. But I said this to you in a private message after I finished my reading, but I just came away from this Earthborn Angel saga that we've been referring to a lot, just with this sense of, man, what a beautifully, carefully constructed mega arc this was that, like you said, showcased the character's heroism and also was able to tap into these themes of sin, forgiveness, redemption, sacrifice, identity. It's kind of amazing looking at it in total that it even existed at all, because as we get deeper into this and explain a bit more about what this version of Supergirl was about, not your typical superhero fare.
No, and it's almost like proto Vertigo or Vertigo adjacent, right? He is tapping into what does it mean to be alive? What does it mean to have a soul? Um, can you forgive someone? Can you move past your prior sins? Yeah, and yeah, she fights Silver Banshee and the Parasite and silly villains like that throughout, but always building this slow accruement. And then once you get to, I would say, the year before 50, you're hitting this sweet spot of she's feeling pretty comfortable about who she is and what she is. And then pride cometh before the fall. And you get to the low point only to sort of come out of it. So it is incredible. And I still go to the comic book store on Wednesday. We've heard recently in media that creators aren't guaranteed an issue 6. And so if you go into DC and say, I'm going to need 50 issues of a Supergirl book to tell the story that I want, and have them say, we're on board. I mean, I don't think those days exist anymore. So it's just incredible that this is out there. And I point people to it all of the time. You need to read this. Even if you don't know who Matrix is, doesn't matter, right? This is a strong story from beginning to end.
Oh, 100%. Like that's the thing. You use the word vertigo, and I agree. It does have that vertigo-esque feel to it. There's a maturity to these stories. The characters feel like real people, which was tremendously engaging. Yet at the same time, to your point, we do have battles with Silver Banshee and Parasite and so on. We have tie-in issues to Final Night and Day of Judgment and Millennium Giants of all things. So you're getting a lot of those typical superhero trappings, but couched within this really in-depth personal story. It's absolutely amazing. And I'm with you. I'm going to co-sign anyone who hasn't read this. I strongly recommend you check it out. And all of the issues are available on the DC app. And I know that as part of the DC Finest line of collected editions, they are starting to recollect the series. There's one that's out, and I believe as of this recording, there's another one that's imminent, right?
Yeah.
So I definitely recommend, because this is one of the things I was thinking about. I'm sure that of the folks listening to our discussion, there are some who read it back in the day or have come to it more recently, and maybe they like it and maybe they don't, but they know of which we speak. But then I know there are folks for whom, at least at this point, our discussion is going to be their main exposure to it. And hopefully we do it justice, and hopefully they're inspired to kind of go and read it, because it is a truly immersive, rewarding reading experience, unlike a lot of what you see, especially of the time. And I don't say this to knock 90s comics. There's amazing runs during that time period. I will continue to shout out the Starman run by James Robinson. That's an absolute all-time favorite. But, and I was thinking about this as I was going through this reading project, I've talked about on this podcast how, despite growing up reading all of the Triangle era Superman books, I did have some 90s gaps, specifically the solo Superboy series, the Steel series, and the Supergirl series. And now, over the course of this podcast, I've closed every single one of them, and they've all been enjoyable to one degree or another. However, and people heard me talk about them, I didn't necessarily get as much out of that Superboy series as I hoped to, as I wanted to. It was fun. The Steel series, by the time we get to Christopher Priest, it really takes off. We get a real perspective there. The characters feel more real, more lived in. But still, I would definitely hold up this Peter David Supergirl run as really being in its own category.
Sure. I mean, the Superboy book, I think, is a ton of fun with Tom Grummett art and Knockout, and it reads like Saturday morning fare. And this is more like on HBO. This is a mature story, and you can't read this and forget it and move on. Oh, I just beat up King Shark. This is, we're getting more hints about some of the mysteries that are going on behind these things. Some of the issues are incredibly dark. Some of the things that we learn about what Comet's character went through, what they do to Comet later, all of those things really felt grown up. And again, this is a Supergirl book, which I think most people at this point thought, oh, she's that saccharine, sweet girl with the pigtails and everything is sweet and lovely. Or she's the Matrix that went crazy and then fell in love with Lex. So it's a big leap and incredible.
Now, in terms of where this fell in your larger Supergirl fan journey, I mean, take me back to 96 when this came out. Were you reading this as it came out, and how long had you been a Supergirl fan? Like, where did this hit you?
Yeah, I say that I became a Supergirl fan. I'm old. Around the sort of the Superman family, daring new adventures time, I was reading that. And part of why I loved her was that in a weird way, I could relate to her. I'm the youngest of five in a very big Italian-American family. There were shadows looming large about people that achieved a lot. And I kind of didn't know what I wanted to do when I was growing up. And I didn't know if I was ever going to find anybody to love me. And you read Supergirl and it's, oh, I am in the shadow of Superman. I have to, honor that family crest and try to be my best. But I'm young and learning, and I fall in love with people that are villains or mermaids or horses, and I'm going to be an actress. No, I'm going to be a guidance counselor. No, I'm going to be a soap opera actress. No, I'm going to go back to school. I don't know what I want to be. And so there was a lot there, and she had the powers of Superman, right? So I could be like, I want to be like Superman. I can't be like Superman. I can aspire to be like Superman. Who's the better fit for who I am at that point reading? Again, it's sort of late 70s, early 80s, and it was her. people are always like, why not Spider-Man? I'm like, I don't know. He can't fly and he doesn't have heat vision. They're like, why not Ultra Boy? He's got a wicked hot girlfriend in the Legion, right? He's a jock. That's not me either. So her character was somebody that I felt in a lot of ways I felt, oh, she's learning and I'm learning and she's got this big shadow that she's trying to like live up to. And I can kind of feel a little bit of that pressure. So loved that. She gets killed in the crisis. Everybody is like, that's the best story of hers that was ever written. And I would ask them, what other stories of hers did you read? And they're like, none. And it's like, okay, it's a great story. There's no doubt she saves the universe, but it's a shame that they felt he was a barnacle on the ship. They bring in Matrix. He's an interesting character. And then she thinks that she's Clark. She flies off into space. She becomes a dupe of Brainiac. She comes back. She falls in love with Lex and kind of like becomes his weird lover, doesn't really know what's going on. And I was like, boy, they bring back the Supergirl character and it's kind of this, she's like really a pawn. And I don't know if they're honoring her. And then Funeral for a Friend happens. And I think all of a sudden, and that Roger Stern miniseries that you talked about.
Yep.
And it's, hey, she's suddenly grown. She thought she was going to have to be the Metropolis hero because Superman was dead. She starts to question a lot of the things that Lex is telling her. Oh, he's trying to clone her so that he can like save himself. She really becomes this powerful hero again. And I thought that miniseries was fantastic. And then this comes out, and I felt it's kind of a left-hand turn, but in a good way. It's a fascinating story and growing. So I was there right from the beginning, and I thought things are cresting in a good way with Reign of the Superman, and again, that Stern miniseries. And now we get Peter David to write her with Gary Frank on art. I mean, what could be better than that? And David honors there's a lot of pre-crisis riffs and homages at the beginning where he's like, I liked that character. I am going to do her honor in the way that I am approaching this new character. So that people that were fans of Supergirl can be fans of the Supergirl, even if it's a little bit of a different taste. So issue number 1, I was there on board.
Oh, that's fantastic. Yeah, I don't want to forget on that note, there are so many beautiful nods to the pre-crisis history. The fact that it's set in Leesburg, a lovely nod to Linda Lee. We have the Danvers family. We have events that take place at Stanhope University. We have Comet. So clearly there was a lot of love.
Dick Malverne is there.
Poor Dick Malverne.
Love interest, right? There is all of this. And he even said, the last line of Action Comics 252 is she says, Superman doesn't want me to be out in the open, but I can be a guardian angel to Midvale. And he said that line of her being a guardian angel is almost what triggered this whole angel story, that he was really going to delve into that. So
it's amazing. Yeah, I'll circle back to what you said a moment ago and once again sing the praises of that Roger Stern miniseries, that 4-parter, because that's an essential stop along the way to this series. I feel like that miniseries walked so that this series could run and really started getting at these deeper questions about, is she alive? What's her true nature? And then, of course, we had briefly mentioned there's that Peter David, Terry Dodson short story in an issue of Showcase where you have Supergirl in and out of the hospital as she's saving people from this natural disaster and really starting to question what it means to be born, to die, to be alive. We saw the building blocks on the way to the series. For myself, I wish that either this had come a little bit later or I had been a little bit older, because I just don't think I was at the right point in my fan journey when this came out, because I remember I owned and read probably the first 12 issues of this. And then I dropped it. And along the way, like when it would cross over with the super titles or Young Justice or something like that, I would drop in and I read the final arc, Many Happy Returns, because there was a lot of hullabaloo when that came out. So I had always read the beginning and end of the series, and I had a general sense of the broad strokes, but it wasn't until now that I really made my way through. But I do remember being 9 when this first came out.
Oh my gosh.
Seeing those flashbacks about Linda Danvers and the satanic cult. And I just remember being kind of weirded out. Like it just was such a departure from the other super titles. like I said, I think I wasn't old enough to really appreciate what was going on. And so I'm so glad. It's always like, this has been on my list forever to finally get back to. And I'm so glad I did. So that's where it kind of hit me. So unfortunately, I kind of missed the train on this one, but I'm glad that I could hop on now.
Yeah, and I think, like you have discovered, that more and more people are saying people should read this. It's probably why it's on the Infinite app, right, and not forgotten. Is that I think as time has gone on, people have said it's funny, but it's great.
Yeah, I've long been on my Justice for Pete Ross campaign on this podcast, and I still think there's probably more with present day Pete that can be done. But as far as Pete Ross in the past, in the pages of Action Comics, I think justice has been served. So I think maybe now I'm going to move on to Justice for Linda Danvers and we could talk about this at the end as we're wrapping up in terms of where DC Comics has left Linda, because I know you've written about this and you've expressed your frustration, and I now share in that. So I think I'm going to now take up the cause of Justice for Linda Danvers. And I feel like in my heart through this podcast, we've manifested certain things over the years, whether or not that's true. I feel it in my heart. So we're going to put this out there, and we're going to see if maybe we can rescue this character from the purgatory to which she has been relegated, because she deserves better.
Yeah, we should talk about it at the end, because I think there's something that I'm seeing in Sophie Campbell's work that I think might end up getting there.
Okay, right on. So for anyone who's like, all right, guys, what are you talking about with this Earthborn Angel business?
Yeah.
So essentially the setup for this series is that the Matrix Supergirl merges with a dying Linda Danvers, who had gotten caught up in the satanic cult that she became a participant in until they turned on her and sacrificed her. So Supergirl merges with the dying Linda Danvers, and they now form a new entity, the Earthborn Angel. And what we find out over the course of the series is that such an act of self-sacrifice for a soul that is beyond hope, that's the recipe for forming an Earthborn Angel. And Supergirl is the angel of fire. We'll come to find that Comet, good old Comet, is the angel of love. And then we have another character, Blythe, who's the angel of light. And the ultimate big bad of the series is Carnivore, the first vampire, who over the course of the series is manipulating events to control and subjugate the Earthborn Angels, to ultimately use them to leverage God to give up control of heaven. Like we said, not your typical superhero fare, but as far as the broadest framework of what this series is about, that's what we're talking about when we say the Earthborn Angel Supergirl, distinct from the heavenly host above, right? These are Earthborn angels. They're in their own category. There are 3 at any given time. And we see these powers manifest in the flaming wings and the vision, the fire vision.
Yeah, and it is a slow burn where we have to find out that the soul that is beyond hope is Linda Danvers, right? She was actually a bad actor. And then we have to have Supergirl understand that she is now alive and human, and we get little pieces of that. And then we start to see things like in some battles, her eyes start to flame a little bit. And then the wings come up. But what are those wings? And why am I teleporting it? And so it is this slow unraveling of what's happening for us to learn this mythos. And that Carnivore guy is present almost from issue 1. You're hearing about him. He's manipulating small things as he's trying to sort of control what happens. And there's even a nod at the end to Crisis, where this whole thing unravels and the Carnivore scheme sort of gets power.
On that note, and I know we're really plunging to basically the climax of this 50-issue arc, but when Linda, Supergirl, is at her lowest and has turned herself over to Carnivore, she is visited by this spirit who gives her the pep talk she needs in her moment of crisis, no pun intended.
Yeah.
And Supergirl asks who this spirit is. And she says, I've taken different forms. I've been the imaginary friend when you were a kid. I've been your guardian angel. I've answered to many names, but the one I love most, Kara, or Kara, depending on your pronunciation.
Yeah.
I got to tell you, man, chills when I hit that.
For sure. And it is we're sort of like hopping all over the place. This Supergirl is the Earth Angel of Fire, of Judgment. She is in full judgment mode towards someone that ultimately ends up. She doesn't kill the guy, but what she does gives him a heart attack. He dies, and so she says, "I am unworthy." And then she gets visited by, "No, you are worthy. You don't know how beautiful you are, the power of your soul, the redemption that you can have." Yes. And then when she says, "My name is Kara," it's like all of the things that you talked about: Leesburg, Dick Malverne, Comet. Now the name, uh, uh, it, 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 reading it off the rack, it was whoa. I've talked about it on my blog that there was a time that DC said, you can't mention the name Supergirl or any of those things. So to have him say that is like, we've come a long way, baby. Crisis is 10 years old.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. For people who maybe are newer to this and you've come up in an era where Kara Zor-El was back, this might not seem like such a big deal, but it was. And yeah, that was a moment that truly gave me chills. I want to read a comment from one of our patrons, Jeff Tischer, because he said something that really crystallized a key aspect of this for me. He said, "I love this Supergirl. Aquaman and this series are where I discovered Peter David. I'm so glad I did. He was a masterful storyteller. And this series is where I also discovered Leonard Kirk, who I think is a great artist. His visual layouts are always easy to follow and engaging. Looking back, I'm so bummed he didn't finish the series out. It turned out to be only another 6 issues." So on that note, we'll talk about that when we get to Many Happy Returns. And obviously with bringing on Ed Bennis, they were going in a different direction, but we'll get to that. But Jeff says, "There are so many great moments in this series, even for someone who has no religious investment or belief. Judeo-Christian mythology is a great framework for telling compelling stories. The fact that Linda always chooses love, even over divine edicts, is wonderful." So that comment really brought all of this into sharp focus for me. I've talked about this on the show before. I spent the majority of my education in Catholic school, all the way from pre-K through college. Only law school was not a religious school. And there was a time where I really did believe and did consider myself a practicing Catholic and went to church on Sunday. And I just got to a point for me personally where it no longer really made sense to me. Nevertheless, I can still find meaning and value in the stories and the lessons of the Bible, right? Of the messages that are being conveyed. I find meaning and value and purpose in that without necessarily believing the facts and the events. And everybody has their belief system, and then that's quite all right. But when Jeff said that, I thought to myself, yeah, like the biblical mythology is fascinating. And the connection I made, I'm a huge Supernatural fan, the television show.
Yeah.
And I'm saying to myself, yeah, it's like, no wonder I loved that show so much and all of its business about the angels, the demons, the archangels. I've probably told the story at some point, but I remember when my son, who's now almost 7, but when he was born, I remember being, up late, trying to hold him while he goes to sleep. But I remember catching up on episodes of Supernatural, and I was up so late and everything started to kind of swirl together. And I started having these vivid dreams that I had to get Archangel Grace for my son, which was a plot point on the show. So all to say that, yeah, that biblical architecture, that mythology, all the business with heaven and hell, the different forms of angels, like utterly fascinating. And to Jeff's point, it's like, even if you don't subscribe to those beliefs, it's still just a very rich and compelling well to draw from. I'm a parent, which means that a family-friendly comic shop is a must, and there's none better than Aw Yeah Comics. Visit one of their 3 locations, Harrison, New York, Muncie, Indiana, or Skokie, Illinois, home to our pal, Sweet Sweet Bernie. Follow them on social media and at awyeahcomics.com for news about signings, live sales, and much more. Their name says exactly how they feel about it. Say it with me now. Aw yeah. My comic shop closed over a decade ago, but if there's one place where I feel that same sense of camaraderie, it's Fat Moose Comics, New Jersey's best and oldest comic book store, led by current owner Sean Hendricks. If you're looking for something and they don't have it, they can probably get it for you. They know a guy. Visit Fat Moose in Whippany, New Jersey, and be sure to reach out via the Fat Moose Comics Facebook page. This podcast is an affiliate of BCW Supplies. The next time you need to restock on comic book bags, boards, boxes, and more, be sure to use promo code FSP to save 10% on your order. That's FSP for Flat Squirrel Productions. It helps support the show too. Thank you. Step into the refraction with Drunken Avenger #1, The Volunteer, an indie comic by Rick Reason that turns the tropes upside down. 4 men died in 9 seconds. John Stevens survived, but survival has a price. Now, the government calls him a variable. The media calls him the Drunken Avenger. And the city of Meridian is caught in the crossfire between civil liberty and national security. Follow @Drunken Avenger on social media for project updates and previews.
Yeah, and it's writ large in some places, and it's more subtle in others. So, I point to issue 9 of this series as like one of the key moments. That's when Buzz has turned Dick Malverne. Buzz, by the way, a demon, has turned Dick Malverne into this guy Tempest Fugit, and they're fighting, and Supergirl is about to kill this demon, and suddenly this vision of Linda appears and says, "You are the most human and caring being that I have ever met. You have redeemed me, right? You, protoplasm, have redeemed me, flawed human." And Linda's face is, as it must have been after they had like beaten and tortured and killed her. And that moment is just incredible for me to sort of start to say, oh, this is really about the soul and forgiveness and redemption. And then later on, she meets, a villain that is, a very conservative religious character, almost like a crusader that she has to, deal with. People start to worship her, and she's like, "You shouldn't be worshiping me." So there is this narrative of religion throughout. Peter David was, a very vocal Jewish man, and there is a lot more, I would say, Christianity and Catholic overtones to this that I think he captured great, which is just another layer of intriguing for me.
Absolutely. Going back to especially that first arc, you mentioned issue 9, and I agree that that's a turning point. That's a key issue. And within that first batch of issues, a couple of things that really stood out to me upon this reread, and probably even more so because I was also drawing upon my memories from when I read these for the first time as a kid. But one of them is that I'm struck in a pleasant way by how dark they allowed Linda pre-merge to be. At the outset of this, we find out Linda Danvers, she seemingly had been taken by this cult, right? So at first glance, it seems like, oh, she's a victim of this cult. But no, then you find out that Buzz the demon had seduced her into this, and she had become, we see this via a flashback, seemingly a willing participant in a double homicide, in the murder of this reverend who had cheated on his wife and then killed his wife, unbeknownst to everyone except Linda, who had observed this. They kill the reverend and his mistress. Now we only see the beginning and then the aftermath of this, with the bodies lying face down with the knives between them. But we see this rush that Linda is experiencing after this.
Yeah.
And as I was going through these issues, I kept saying to myself, well, at some point they're going to walk this back, right? Like, we're going to find out that maybe it wasn't exactly what we saw, or she was being manipulated even more so, but they don't. And I so admire that restraint to allow that character to have been at such a low point. And then obviously it makes the redemption all the more impactful. But I was so struck by that.
Yeah. And you could imagine that when you're a Supergirl fan, and they say, oh, she's merged with somebody who actually was a murderer. You go, boy, I hope you guys know what you're doing. But this is where, it's all about how good the story is. Swamp Thing can become a plant and not a mockery of a man. Shade the Changing Man can be Vertigo, and Supergirl can be an Earthborn angel. If you have the props to tell that story in a compelling way. So yeah, we learn in issue 7, hey, everything that you thought you knew about Linda Danvers was not right. And Buzz is not just a bad boy; he's kind of a demon in reality. So that is, a choice, and good for DC for saying, yeah, you know what, go for it, because they probably didn't know what to do with Supergirl anymore, right? So we may as well take a big swing. And even around that, the dark stuff is still Matrix saying like, I don't know if who am I? She has this weird, she fights Chemo, and Chemo is like, am I even real? And she's like, I don't even know if I'm real, And then at one point, Silver Banshee yells Supergirl, and Supergirl doesn't die. She's like, oh, that's because I have another name. That is like my true name. That means I'm real all of a sudden. So this growth, um, and this tortured background is such the fuel for everything that happens moving forward.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, to your point about DC being bold enough to allow this, it's one of those things. It would have been just as easy to make it that she was simply a full on victim of this cult, or maybe she was a gleeful observer, but not necessarily a participant. But the fact that they let it go as far as they did and didn't walk it back, like you said, a very bold choice. And I'm glad that they had the courage to go there. I mean, it was truly like I kept waiting for further flashbacks and they didn't come. And I'm like, okay, like this is the realm that we're in. And you were getting at something that was kind of my other big picture observation, especially about those early issues. I feel like it was such a clever, elegant way of depicting the perspective here, because when we open the series, it reads generally like, and there's a lot of confusion for the character and for the audience, but big picture, reads like Matrix Supergirl is accessing these memories. She's encountering people from Linda's life and is getting these flashes and she's putting it together. But it's like over the course of those issues, they really do become one. And it's a funny thing. I hope I can explain this well. Like as I'm reading it, I think I was approaching it in more basic terms or comic book terms where I'm in my head, I'm like, okay, so is it, is it Matrix or is it Linda here? Is it just the memories? Like what exactly? But no, it really is these two entities becoming one, sharing this single identity and shared memories and history. It's really, really fascinating.
Yeah, at one point, like remnants of the protoplasm of Matrix come back as almost a villain.
Yep.
And so you say, so what was it that merged with Linda? If there's enough mass of protoplasm to form another body and come back, was it a soul that merged? So there are these ecumenical or ecclesiastic mysteries about this that I think I still puzzle over now and then.
Yeah, right. Like that's the thing. It's I don't know that it's so easy to clearly articulate or define. I think ultimately, as far as these two becoming one, it's like, yes, it's this protoplasmic Supergirl. And yes, to your point, the leftovers that go down the drain ultimately form this adversary down the line. But yeah, it's this protoplasmic being with all of the memories that Matrix Supergirl had acquired up until that point, merging with this dying Linda form, and then sharing their memories and her soul and forming this new person. And yeah, that's what each one provides for the other, right? There's a sense of incomplete to each of these women at the outset of this, right? Supergirl clearly, like we talked about, had already been wrestling with these ideas of, am I alive? Do I have my own identity? Because she was an artificial being, albeit one capable of thinking and feeling. But is she really alive? Does she have a soul? And then we have Linda Danvers, who does have a soul and an identity and a family and a backstory and all of that, but is clearly missing something in her life and has gone down a very dark, evil, troubled path. And so she's able to provide that soul, that identity for Supergirl. Or Matrix is able to provide that redemption, that goodness. And that truly changes her soul. And to your point, when we get that issue 9, where you have the manifestation of the soul of Linda giving Supergirl that pep talk when she needs it, it really rings true. So yeah, it's amazing.
Yeah, I mean, we're going to wax the car a lot, but worthy, and again, I just think we eventually hit 50, but all of these small breadcrumbs are just being sort of fed in, and all of this backstory and all of these other things are slowly growing, which is really, I think, the power of this is that he paced it so wonderfully, while still giving we're going to have a slugfest with the female Furies. There will be that comic booky stuff, but the foundation of this, the chaos stream under the town that makes it more susceptible to, evil and demonic things. He brings back Satan Girl. We hear about other incarnations of the angels back in like the 1600s. All of that mythos is just growing on itself.
Yeah, the Chaos Stream, very akin to the Hellmouth and Buffy.
Yep.
Right, definitely
Yeah.
in similar territory there. As far as sort of big picture themes that manifest, one of the things that really stood out was the choice of villain. Because I feel like in many instances, and I'm thinking specifically with respect to Rampage, Banshee, Despero, Parasite, we have adversaries who similarly are merged beings, where there are multiple entities in one physical form. Even Parasite, right? At this point in time, we had that doctor who had been sort of consumed by Parasite, and his consciousness lived on. So it was interesting to highlight, obviously, what was going on internally with Supergirl, but reflected in these villains.
Kudos to you, because I've never put that together. But that is a very interesting take on all of this. You're right. The Parasite has two voices inside it, two sort of beings. Rampage has the sweet scientist who in that issue is like seduced by somebody evil, and then rampages out and tries to become evil, which is sort of like a Linda Danvers step in until Supergirl sort of stops that from happening. So that is a wrinkle that I never saw. So just another reason for me to reread these now.
Yeah, and I think I probably only picked up on that because I was reading all 50 issues over a few nights. And I have to say, because, we just had our 250th episode and someone asked, like, how do you find the time to read all this stuff? And I gave my answer there, but also when it's great material, you love it. And it's not a slog. And I have to say, I mean, these read great. Like I didn't feel like, oh, I got to hit another issue. They read very well. I guess one of the other big picture things that is worth mentioning here, we talked about how we do have these nods to pre-crisis Supergirl history, which is wonderful. And of course we have to talk more about poor Dick Malverne. But the other thing too, it's like Peter David was also paying off what had been going on in the Triangle era comic books. The fact that Elizabeth Persk shows up here. Yeah. Right. We and Matrix had met her in that Roger Stern miniseries. She was the third wife of Lex Luthor, who he had married for social connections. And she reaches out to Supergirl in that mini and ends up becoming her mentor at the end of it. And then there's an issue of Action Comics afterwards where she's referenced, they're still working together. And then, she kind of falls away, and you don't know if she's necessarily going to be referenced or seen at all in this, but she ends up being an old friend of Dick Malverne's mother and is very taken with Linda's sculptures of angels and becomes a bit of a patron and connects her and gets her at these museums and connects her with clients. I was wondering, I was really curious. It's like, oh, is Linda going to reveal that she's actually Supergirl to Elizabeth? But were you surprised that she didn't?
I don't think I was surprised. I think because Linda is now Linda and not Matrix Supergirl and all of that backstory, I'm not surprised that she sort of kept it, a secret. We won't talk about it because it's after this Earth Angel thing, but she does interact with Lex, I think in issue 55 or something, which is also another callback to sort of them having their romance. So I do think that David was sort of saying, I'm going to take, everything that I possibly can. I'm looking at pre-crisis Supergirl. I'm looking at Matrix and her history. And I respect all of that and I honor all of that and I want to build on all of that. So, but you're right, to see her show up was, oh, isn't that great? And, even early on, the powers are different because she's merged. So she's like, I'll become invisible. And she can't become invisible. Or, I'll change my shape into the one that has all the spikes on the arm. I can't do that anymore either. It is, again, building on all of that history.
Yeah, absolutely. But actually the Linda Lex interaction is in these first 50. So we find out it's a couple of issues. There's one where Carnivore in his human guise of Mr. Carnivian, he's having this discussion with someone who turns out to be Lex.
Oh,
right?
yeah.
So they form this alliance, but then Lex ends up warning Supergirl about the threat of Carnivore. Now, is it out of some form of feeling for the relationship that they had? Is it still just some kind of angle that he's playing? As always with Lex, a bit nebulous and we can read into it what we interpret. But yeah, I mean, and it's so brief in the grand scheme of 50 issues, this one scene between them. But even that, it's like, okay. I mean, obviously that relationship with Lex II was a huge part of that Matrix journey before the series. So to actually have at least a scene between Lex and Supergirl, I'm so glad that Peter David carved out some space for that.
Yeah.
And then not only them, but Ma and Pa, they actually played a larger role in this than I expected. And Linda does confide in them what has happened to her before she even tells Clark, which is its own thing. But Ma and Pa, they end up getting fairly involved with Fred and Sylvia Danvers and in trying to help save their marriage, because, we see some of this through flashbacks and then the rest of it plays out in the present day. But Fred, clearly there's anger there, and there's been this fracture in the family prior to the merge because of Linda's dark ways and all of that. We find out that Sylvia, who, at the outset is this devoutly religious woman, but we find out she's also a recovering alcoholic, and she falls off the wagon after they find out about what's happened to their daughter. And it gets to the point where for a good stretch, I mean, Fred is planning to leave Sylvia and file for divorce, and the Kents are there, and they're trying to play peacemaker. And I'm curious your take on this, because there was a part of me that's like, sometimes that is the right answer for people. Like, maybe don't insert yourself too much. In the end, Fred and Sylvia stay together. And so I think Ma and Pa were on the right track, but yeah, they were arguably overstepping.
It was great. There's a scene because Supergirl basically has to come out to them, right? I need you to know that I am Supergirl. This thing happened. So maybe I'm not completely your daughter. And that is what kicks Sylvia to hit the bottle again. And there are scenes at the beginning that I think are great, again, as a dad, and you're a dad, where Fred is like, when is the other shoe going to drop? Since this whole thing happened, you've been acting way nicer to us than you used to be. Like, what is going on here? And so I think she comes to a point that she's like, I can't hide this anymore. I have to tell them. And there's a great scene where she says, like, maybe I should have never revealed anything. And both Pa and Fred at the same time say, you did the right thing, right? Which I thought was great. Pa Kent wisdom. I'll always love Pa Kent wisdom. And we haven't even talked about Wally the God Boy, because what ends up happening is that she tells Wally, please, my poor mom. And he's like, I'll do this for you, but know that then, like, this is the one time I'm going to do something for you. You might need this later. And she goes, no, I don't need it. And so this miracle happens, right? Wally shows her something that nudges her, Sylvia back to the right path.
Oh, Wally the God Boy. So
yeah.
So for any fans of the Supernatural show out there, think Chuck. We're in the realm of Chuck here, guys. But in this instance, so it's this young boy with a sweater and bow tie and a little derby hat and glasses and a baseball bat. And he lives with his grandparents. And it's funny because I feel like he looms a lot larger. I think, he makes probably fewer actual appearances than we think, but they're impactful whenever he does. And yes, the idea seems to be that he's God, although we never get an actual official confirmation. And it gets a little bit more muddled when we see Carnivore in his human guise and he looks like an older version of Wally. Yes. So then it's like, well, is Wally a younger version? Then he turns evil at some point. Is he God? Is he just some sort of other angel? What is your ultimate interpretation of Wally? Because I read him as God, but I'm curious what your take is.
Yeah, I read him as God. At one point she says, like, what are you? He's like, I'm God, right? And at some point he swings, I forget who he hits with the baseball bat, but he knocks whoever the supervillain is, like, into the next town. And so I've always just said, like, I guess I got to take him at his word. He's always there. He seems to know everything. He performs a miracle and saves Sylvia. And the fact that the Carnivore looks like him makes me think that he has to be within. He's not just a kid. He's got to be more than a kid, right? So.
Yeah, no, I'm on board with him being God. It's like I said, it's very reminiscent of a character in Supernatural who you meet, and there he first presents as a prophet, and then the kind of the first leg of his journey ends on a very ambiguous note, where it's like, well, he seems to be more than that. But the show waits seasons more before they actually reveal that he is in fact God. And that's kind of what I had in my head as I was reading Wally. But yeah, I mean, he knows about Supergirl's new nature as an Earthborn angel that he shares with her. She had been clued in first by Satanus. She has an encounter with him, but then we have more from Wally. And yeah, to your point, that intervention essentially with Sylvia. And before the conversation between them is really interesting, where he he basically talks about the human race being lab rats, right? Like this is an experiment that he's conducting. And so I thought that, that aspect of it was interesting. And another key moment where he intervenes is at the conclusion of that first arc where Supergirl's fighting Tempest. By the way, for the Lois and Clark fans out there, Lois and Clark, The New Adventures of Superman, we spent a lot of time late last year talking about the villain Tempest. A very different interpretation here, not the same character, but to just have another villain named Tempest, I thought was worth noting here. But there's that moment where we see in Buzz's eye, right, like the reflection of the bat, before Buzz then intervenes and actually helps Supergirl in her moment of need. So yeah, Wally ends up being really clutch there. So yeah, I read him as God as well, but fascinating character. I talk about Smallville a lot, but when it comes to listening, one podcast is at the top of my queue. Always Hold On to Smallville, hosted by our pal, Zach Moore. Zach and his guests bring tremendous insight, passion, and humor to each and every episode. And while their series rewatch has concluded, the podcast continues with more great Smallville and Superman talk. Listen wherever you get podcasts, and keep an eye out for the other shows on the Always Hold On to network. We love digging into epic comic book runs, but what about the art of the single issue? Single Bound is a podcast series hosted by married couple Amy and Logan as they review single issues of comics, many of them starring the Man of Steel, Logan's favorite character. Listen and subscribe on Spotify and YouTube, and follow the show on Instagram at Single Bound Podcast. Ever wonder what would happen if a person who knew barely anything about comics decided to absorb hundreds of Superman stories from all eras and media? That's exactly what Robbo is doing on This Podcast Will Never Die, which starts with all the ways the Man of Steel stood out on the newsstands in 1938. Listen and subscribe to This Podcast Will Never Die, and you'll never look at Superman's trunks the same way again.
Yeah, and this is why it's hard to explain. We're an hour into talking, or almost an hour into talking, and it's not really a straightforward narrative or an easy one to sort of like label or discuss. And so if you said like, yeah, there's a kid walking around Leesburg who's God, and she's an Earthborn angel who, it's why, I don't know if you've ever heard the story, but Dan Didio went to Six Flags to ride a Superman roller coaster. Have you heard the story?
No.
He goes to Six Flags, which was doing DC-inspired things. He's on the Superman roller coaster, and as you're waiting in line, you come to a sign that talks about the character. And he reads the Supergirl sign that's like, a protoplasmic being from another alternative universe comes to Earth and fuses with a girl and becomes an angelic force for good. And he's like, too complicated. So he's like, we gotta go back to something that's a little bit more classic and simple, which is a shame, because I do think this book was really, hitting its creative stride. And you'll talk about many happy returns. I think sales were increasing at the time when the plug ultimately gets pulled.
Yeah, I mean, that's a tough. I had not heard that story. I'm not shocked, and it's one of those things. Look, being as cold and calculating as we can be about this, it's like, yeah, if you're really looking at this from a business standpoint and a marketing standpoint in terms of the sellability of something like this, it's like, yeah, it is convoluted. It is different. It's one of those things, like if you actually invest the time and you read it, it's immensely rewarding. But yeah, maybe getting people to kind of take that step could be challenging. But so what have we not hit on yet that we should jump to next?
I do think that, you mentioned that the Carnivore's plot is ultimately to just keep whittling away at Supergirl's, faith and internal strength to the point that she gives in. And we see, I'll never forget, my friend got married. His wife started to read comics. She read the Supergirl book, And about 3 years in, she's like, when are they going to stop picking on her? Right? Because it's true that there are all of these stories where it's like she wins, but there's sort of like a little bit. And so I do think that the point that she gets solo and then redeems herself is why I think you have to read this as a 50 issue arc. You could stop at 9, I guess, but you really got to read all 50 issues to get there. And I point to it was a standalone issue. I think it was number 32. Yeah, where she goes and she's like, oh, there's like a child
Yep.
prostitution ring, and I'm going to go and I'm going to go break that up because how horrible is that? And it turns out that what ends up happening at the end is that all of these freed underage prostitutes are like, great, we're going to go out and start murdering people in your name. And she's like, oh my God, that's not the message that I wanted to give. Like, I thought I was doing good. Turns out maybe I didn't end up doing good. And there's the carnivore, like, yes, it all unrolls just as I wanted it to. And it culminates, I think, in issue 48, where there is a faith healer who has been telling Dick Malverne that I'm curing you of your cancer. That's all been a lie. Dick Malverne dies. She goes to judge this guy. I am the angel of judgment. She busts through the church wall, this double-edged spread with her fire wings out. Her eyes are flaming. I judge you. He has a heart attack and dies. And this is a line that she did not want to cross. And Buzz says something like, she's in full judgment mode. This is going to end bad. And it does. So that thread throughout this 50 issue arc, I think, is really this slow, wonderful burn to get to that point of the low point.
Oh man, I couldn't agree more. Yeah, I think showing the fallibility of the character and showing those dominoes that you laid out account for why she gets to the low point she does, that she willingly surrenders herself to carnivore. Yeah, I mean, I co-sign on that. Yeah, that issue with that sex trafficking ring in Thailand was so harrowing. And yeah, it's one of those things. And I think throughout all of these, right, she's well-intentioned, but then there are these unintended consequences. And I guess another instance that I would cite is that Stanhope University issue with Steele, where we have this bigot who's coming to campus to speak, and there are all these protesters, and Steele joins with them, and they form this picket line, and Supergirl intervenes, even though she disagrees with the speech, right? She's a proponent of the speaker having the ability to have the forum, and it ends up backfiring, at least in the sense that she gets a lot of blowback, right? To the point where Cutter, we haven't mentioned Cutter yet, but one of our supporting characters here who starts off as a reporter, and then really, really butts heads with the editor at the paper, who's really on this anti-Supergirl crusade. And then he ends up becoming Supergirl's press agent and sets up all these speaking engagements for her and is managing her image. But that image needs that because of the events at Stanhope with this business over whether or not the speaker should be allowed to deliver his message. So yeah, like you see these various, and I like that, because it's like, yeah, sometimes things don't go right.
Yeah. And I said at the very beginning, one of the things that I really like about the overall character of Supergirl is that, hey, I'm young and I'm learning. I'm going to make mistakes and I have to learn from those mistakes. I'm just going to constantly try to make myself better. Superman is always perfect, right? And so this character just has a little bit more juice to her because she can say things like, oh, like, I kind of messed up there, didn't I? Maybe I shouldn't, speak with my fists first and I should think first, right? Or maybe I should have intervened in a less violent way to try to show this is a better way that we can sort of do things. And so I think he also, David, that is Peter David, embraced that, right? She didn't even know she was alive, right? So she's still really learning all of these things.
Yeah. So we mentioned Dick Malverne a few times here. Obviously, we talked about him in our pre-crisis discussions, and I was not aware that he was a presence in this series. So I was so pleasantly surprised to see Dick Malverne pop up here. So yeah, here he's from the South. He comes from this really wealthy family, but he's trying to make it on his own, though he's not averse to taking gifts from his family, like a very fancy car that he impresses with. And clearly, he's taken with Linda from the jump. He also has a horse, Byron, and shows up at these critical junctures. This ties into the Comet discussion that we can get to in a second here. But yeah, he is ill, but then he ends up having this seemingly miraculous recovery. Unfortunately, the upshot of all of this is that the reason why he's healthy is that Buzz, or rather a piece of Buzz's consciousness or self, had embedded within Dick and kept the cancer at bay. And when Buzz ultimately reveals himself during an intimate moment between Linda and Dick Malverne, Supergirl is able to remove that piece of Buzz from Dick. But when that happens, the cancer returns and he becomes very ill very quickly. And to your point, he buys into this remedy promised by this church of Supergirl that has sprung up that is nothing but a sham, and ultimately expires. And it's one of those things when Linda and Fred find Dick's body, and he's been there for a little while, just a punch to the gut. And this is another instance, not unlike how dark they let Linda be at the outset of all of this. This was another instance, as I was reading it, I thought like, oh, there's got to be some sort of do-over, some sort of way to bring him back. But no, there isn't. I really appreciate that, because once again, like, I feel like it would have been very easy to provide some sort of out here to restore Dick Malverne. But it was so heartbreaking to see all of that play out.
Yeah, and it feeds into that thing that we talked about. Oh, the right thing for me to do is to remove the demon from my boyfriend.
Right.
Oh, remove the demon from my boyfriend. And in essence, I've given him cancer because of that. And you're right. We can have Zatanna say cure backwards, the purple ray, like all of those things. But no, this is the outcome of what you did, is he is now dead. And then the outcome of him dying is her confronting this guy and causing his death. It's just one domino after another that I think all has been set up by the Carnivore and Buzz with a purpose to bring her to this unbelievably low point.
Yeah, I mean, very much so. A question for you, because like I said, Buzz reemerges during this intimate moment, right? So Dick clearly has shown this interest in Linda, and they've been going on various dates, but she keeps disappearing because because duty calls. But from Dick's perspective, it seems like, oh, maybe she's not really that interested. And I guess my question is, do you think that Linda was genuinely feeling for Dick Malverne, or was it that essence of Buzz that was providing some sort of pull there? Like, what's your read on that?
Yeah, I've always thought it was probably that Matrix loved Dick Malverne, but Linda loved Buzz, and so there probably is a little bit of a mix there. I do think that, Buzz is the bad boy and very charismatic, and so I think it's easy to see why she might be attracted to him. But I always thought it was just Dick.
Okay. I do like that read on it, though. And by the way, just to provide another point of reference here, Buzz is essentially like Spike from Buffy. Very much in that vein of the kind of lovable rogue. And I know in the next batch of issues, we're going to be going on a road trip with Linda and a depowered Buzz. So I guess we'll have even more to say about him there. But the way the Dick Malverne bit played out was really heartbreaking and surprising, yet inevitable, which is always a tough balance to pull off. And it's funny because we talked about, Martin and we talked about the ultimate fate of the pre-crisis version of Dick Malverne, specifically in that solo story by Tim Sale, where it picks up from the very end of Daring New Adventures of Supergirl from the end of the Bronze Age, and then shows that he was diagnosed with this terminal disease, and he has his final meeting with Supergirl. But this came before that. Like, the idea of Dick Malverne succumbing to a terminal illness predated that solo story. I mean, I don't know if it was a direct inspiration in any way. I have no idea. But that was very interesting to me.
Yeah, the last panel of Daring New Adventures is him just showing up and kissing her, right? And then the book gets canceled, and then she dies in Crisis. So I don't think Paul Kupperberg has ever said that this was his ultimate goal, was to kill off Dick Malverne. So I think this is fresh. And then you wonder if, I think Diane Schutz wrote that story with Tim Sale, if she was like, oh, let me build on that, like a snake eating its tail. Now Matrix, impacting Silver Age Supergirl.
Yeah. Jumping around a little bit more here, I love that in the Day of Judgment issue, we get a meeting between Supergirl and Zor-El, the angel.
Yeah.
I feel like that would have been such a missed opportunity. Like, that's the other thing with all of this, where we're talking about all of these biblical aspects. Well, in the realm of the DC superhero universe, we have the presence, we have angels. One of them is on the Justice League. So I love that they had that opportunity to meet, right?
Yeah, and he is even like, I am in awe of you, right? Like, you have an even more special role than I have in the grand scheme of things. And, so we are still learning about this Earth Angel stuff, I think, at that point. And so, wow, I know that Zor-El was, in the host of hosts, like a seraphim almost. And so if he's saying this about that group, it makes it even more interesting.
Absolutely. And then we've referenced Comet a number of times here. So this was another instance where I have now educated myself on pre-crisis Comet. So I had that backstory, but I had no idea what direction they were going in here.
Yeah.
And there's a good stretch where it's really this open question as to who actually might be Comet, and almost all of our supporting cast members, are possible contenders. It could be Dick Malverne. It could be his horse. It could be Cutter Sharp, who we mentioned before. It ends up being, spoiler alert, but it ends up being Cutter's ex-wife, Andy. And we'll get into more of her backstory. But yeah, I mean, I welcome your take on this iteration of Comet, because it was just genuinely surprising as I was reading it and not knowing where it was going.
Yeah, even first of all, it's like a two-legged horse,
right?
Like being. So it's not a true horse, but it's Comet, and it's super fast. And of course, the fact that Dick has a horse named Byron who's got a comet-looking thing on his. It's like, oh, maybe they're really going to go back to that that iteration and honor that history. But she is one of these Earth Angels, and we hear her story about how Andy was at a very low point, and there was this intergalactic criminal, and they also fuse in this way. And she's the angel of love, and so there's all of this. Supergirl is very attracted, but is it a natural attraction or not a natural attraction? And this was at a time. It's 1996. Andy is an openly gay character who is kicked out of her house by her family, who can't deal with that. I think, we've come a long way, which I thought, again, added to this, mythos of who are these Earth Angels and what do they represent? And they're kind of tortured beings in their own way. So I thought that was I did not think it was her. I can remember reading the issue and being like, whoa, like that came out. I was not expecting that. I forget who I thought it was, but I didn't think it was her for sure.
Yeah. I mean, there were various content, by the way, so I read all of this digitally on the app. I was so annoyed because I went to, it's the issue where Comet is ultimately revealed. But in the description, it's just like, in this issue, Supergirl finds out that Comet is Andy Jones. I'm like, what the hell? Like, why would you? Come on.
Come on.
And it was genuinely a surprise. I mean, I feel like it these days, right? Because, we're so immersed in all of this stuff and we're theorizing. Like, I feel like it's hard for me to really be surprised. And I will say, when we find out, prior to the reveal, we find out that Andy is a lesbian and she is interested in Linda, and she makes that interest known. And to your point, like, there had been this attraction between Supergirl and Comet. At that point, I was like, okay, it's probably Andy, and then we're gonna tie this in here. So I guess it wasn't the biggest shock of all time, but I was still kind of annoyed at that copy there. It's like, what the hell?
Yeah.
But what was really clever, I like this a lot, because Dick does show up a lot of times on his horse at these really critical junctures, but you ultimately find out it's like it was the influence. I don't know how subtle or direct it was meant to be, but the influence of that piece of buzz within him driving him to these events. So I like that was accounted for. But yeah, the Comet business was fascinating. Hopefully I even remember all of these details, but it's like the original Comet was this jockey, this horse rider, right, who had been critically injured and caught in this stampede, and then was rebuilt by the Atlas Corporation, run by Carnivore. And so he became this Comet being. Meanwhile, you had Andy, who had come out to her parents, and they did not take it well at all. I mean, really harrowing flashbacks there, but I'm glad, to your point, I'm glad that the book got into that. And and ahead of its time for the 90s. So I thought that was great. And so Andy really kind of goes on this self-destructive streak and really engaging in higher risk behavior. And she tries to climb Mount Everest alone, and she ends up getting snowed in, and all hope is lost, but for the intervention of Comet. And that original Comet performs the same sort of self-sacrifice that Matrix did for Linda. And so this merging of that original Comet and Andy, that forms this Earthborn Angel. So yeah, it was fascinating to see all of this unfold. And, we had talked about Comet a good bit, and this was another instance of tapping into a character that had existed in a different form and putting a fresh spin that still, I think, retained a lot of those core aspects but also really was its own thing.
Yeah, and she has to fall the same way that Supergirl has to fall for Carnivore's plot to happen, right? He has to, subjugate all of these Earth Angels. And so we get a whole issue of her being tortured by the Carnivore, forced to relive all of these terrible moments in her life until she finally breaks. That's a harrowing issue. That is just a tough issue to read. And I think the cover is like a bloody television screen.
Yes.
As he keeps saying, like, well, Supergirl's great. Why hasn't she saved you? You think that she loves you. Your friends don't love you. Your family doesn't. And she has to keep reliving this emotional torment until she's like, you're right. I should just join you. Tough read.
Yeah. I mean, as far as supporting characters, obviously we've referenced Fred and Sylvia and Cutter. There's also Maddie Harcourt. Any connection to Amelia Harcourt, who's now a player in the James Gunn DCU? But at least the name stood out. But Maddie, who's this long-term friend of Linda, who's also a doctor. I enjoyed her character, and she and Cutter have their unlikely romance. And I know in issues ahead that they'll ultimately get engaged and all of that. But I don't know if you had anything else on the Maddie front.
No, she's, I think, a resident. And I think when the book came out, I was just starting my residency. So I was like, oh, there's like a little POV character for me.
Nice. Very cool. I don't know. Anything else as far as supporting characters we haven't talked about yet? I feel like we've hit on all of them in some way, shape, or form, but anything we haven't hit?
No, I don't think so. I think it's a big cast, and I think David gave them all unique voices and perspectives and reasons to be in the story, which is always appreciated by me.
Yeah, like I said before, they felt like real people, and having Sylvia torn between her faith and alcoholism. It felt real in a way that these stories don't always. So I really did appreciate that. And I know in subsequent issues, we're going to find out that Sylvia is pregnant. And I know I'm really jumping ahead, but while we're talking about these supporting characters, in the very final arc of the series, she will give birth to a child named Wally.
Yeah.
I guess maybe my question / observation on this front, because I've skimmed ahead. I haven't done my full read of the next batch of issues yet, but I know that while we do check in on our supporting cast occasionally, we don't spend a lot of time with them in the next chunk of this series. And I'm just curious how you feel about that. Did it feel appropriate in terms of where the book was going, or did you feel like you were missing them?
I hope we talk a little bit about issue 50.
Yes.
And then it is a road trip afterwards, right? Because now it's, you have to find the essence of Supergirl to reunite with her in this way. And so we're going to travel across the country with Buzz, who's got like a internal magnet to sort of find all of that. And so it's a road trip. So I do think that the story takes us away from Leesburg and takes us away from those characters. I also get the sense, and, I wish I could have asked him, I wonder if DC was like, what do you do? Like, okay, we gave you 50 issues. Move along here, right? And he was like, okay, I'm going to try something fresh. I'm going to put her in I'll put her in the animated universe costume, depower her a little bit. She'll have to reunite with all of these people because of the events of issue 50. And maybe we can sort of freshen things up. And it is a shame because I did love all of those. Obviously we've talked about how great these 50 issues are. It kind of felt a little bit of an abandonment, that next arc, and I feel while these 50 issues played out so wonderfully, that's not 50 issues. And at the end of it, I was like, okay, we need to end this, right? It had a very different feel. I still loved it, but I was like, this probably could have been 9 issues and not whatever it ended up being, 20, you know.
Yes. So I skimmed ahead before I finished these 50 issues. And so I knew that moving forward, we weren't going to be spending a lot of time with Fred and Sylvia and Cutter and Maddie. And so the end of this arc, issue 50, felt even more bittersweet because it's like, oh, I know that we're basically at the end of our time with these characters.
Yeah.
And I agree, even without knowing for sure what the mandates were behind the scenes, you look at the next couple of years of this book, even before Many Happy Returns. And between the animated series look, this road trip feel, moving beyond our previous supporting cast and setting, the fact that we're tying into Lex's run for president, we're tying into our worlds at war for a few months. I mean, maybe that would have happened anyway, but it definitely felt like an attempt to, okay, like let's make this more of a tour around the DCU book as opposed to angels and demons and all of that, even though there is that search for Supergirl, which we'll get to. But I agree with you. I think that was probably what was motivating that. I have to imagine.
Yeah. Yeah. It just feels that way. Let's bring Mary Marvel in. Like, well, then maybe that'll be an interesting dynamic, you know? So I do think it must have been, okay, we gave you your one little run. Like, let's go somewhere else.
One character we haven't hit on that I do feel we'd be remiss, especially given where I know this is ultimately going to end up in issue 74, but Twilight, the character Twilight.
Yeah.
This refugee from Apocalypse who comes to Earth and has the ability to bring the dead to life, but is unable to save her sister, Jane, who ends up being alive in the present. I guess I don't have the entire picture on that front. Do we ever get an actual explanation for Jane, for the sister being alive? We don't, right?
I don't think we do.
Okay.
And please don't ask me to explain that character because
Yeah.
I don't know if I can adequately do it.
No, I think that's the basic setup for this character. And you had mentioned earlier fighting the Granny Goodness's Furies. And that's the connection point there, is that the Furies come to Earth to bring Twilight back. But Twilight had been this adversary and had engaged the villain group, the Extremists, to carve this path of death and destruction in Dick Malverne's hometown. So Twilight really initially set up as his adversary, but with the sympathetic backstory of growing up centuries ago with the ability to bring back the dead, but unable to save her own sister. Yeah, I mean, as far as issue 50 and where this ultimate confrontation with Carnivore leads, I take it away.
Yeah, it's I probably should have reread the letter column to see what people thought of it. It's kind of an understated ending, right? Like this guardian angel spirit of Kara comes back. You have to get out of this prison. You have to end this from happening, because it turns out that the Carnivore actually does take over Earth, right? Okay, God, I have your angels. You have to give me the power over Earth. Okay. And so everybody becomes demonic. We see the superheroes have sort of mutated into demons. The Earth is descending into really a hell on Earth, like not an idiom, truly. And then Supergirl ends up showing up and is like, you know what? I feel all of your pain, and I forgive you. It is the solution is love and forgiveness, which, to many people, there's probably a group out there that was like, couldn't she have just punched him in the face, right? But when you again read all of this, that's the ending that almost needed to happen, right? She sacrifices herself. Both of them get impaled on his sword, and they both die. And she saves the universe in this very understated way. She hooks up with Blythe and with Comet, and you also have to reject this. Don't you agree? You have to reject this. Look what's happening. Yes, she turns them. She's the angel of judgment, and instead of judging, she forgives. And then the thing that I really thought was brilliant was that true ending of that is, hey, everybody thinks Supergirl died, absolutely saving the world from something that was going to destroy it. And you have to slowly reveal yourself again. You've been depowered. We're going to, the power level is interesting. What was the 1938 Superman? You can jump a third of a mile. You have a little bit of invulnerability. You don't have vision powers anymore. The Earth Angel aspect of you has been stripped away. But such a wonderful nod to the Crisis, right? Is that, oh, Supergirl died saving the universe. Much like in Crisis, Supergirl died saving the universe. Again, just bringing that riff in. And so I just think that's um, a fantastic ending to these 50 issues. When you read, I can only imagine what it must have been like for you to like, I'm reading all 50 of these in a very short period of time. Feels perfect, right? I still think it feels perfect.
Yeah, it felt very satisfying. And yes, while it could have devolved into a typical slugfest, the fact that Supergirl turned to the power of forgiveness in that moment resonated. So I like that a lot.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's interesting because there's this whole idea that sort of the basis for morality on Earth is a reflection of whatever the order is in heaven. And so once you have Carnivore taking over, that inverts the moral or the morality on Earth. So everything that had been considered a virtue before is considered a weakness, and vice versa. So it's interesting to see how that plays out. And yeah, the upshot of all of this is that there is this separation between Linda and May, essentially, right? Like this Earthborn angel now has been separated. And so the Linda that results is a much more modestly powered Supergirl. And then in the next batch of issues, she's going to adopt the animated series look and like you said, very much akin to the Golden Age Superman, being able to leap rather than outright fly and still having strength and invulnerability, but at a much more modest level than before. But yeah, I mean, it really does mark the conclusion of the story that started in issue 1, because we began with this merging and now we end with this split between them. And that whole road trip in the next batch of issues is going to be Linda and Buzz's search for May, for this Matrix entity. And I know I'm jumping ahead and we're going to talk more about it next time, but I want to talk about it while we're here, while we're really getting into this, because ultimately at the conclusion of the next arc, we're going to have this moment where Linda once again is mortally wounded and May is going to offer to merge with her again to save her. And Linda's going to say no, but instead for Matrix to save and merge with Twilight, who also has been very severely injured. Matrix will do that. And like we said before, Twilight has the ability to restore the dead. So that ends up paying off for Linda, because the restored Twilight, who's now the new Earthborn angel, this combination of Matrix and Twilight, is able to restore Linda. Right. So that's where we're going.
Yeah. And I think the thing that I like about that next arc is that Linda is very much still sort of like down on herself in many ways about like, am I worthy? Who am I? And she is teaming up a lot with Mary Marvel, who is pure and good and wonderful and sweet and all of those things. And this whole, I'm much more of a regular human with all of these fallibilities. And Mary is this like superstar. I think builds that sort of narrative throughout, where kind of at the end, Linda's like, I don't even know if I'm worthy of anything. You know, you should save her and not me, because I've already done all of the things that I've done.
So here's a big question I had for you as I was reading, because, and we've referenced this, the fact that Carnivore is able to break down the 3 Earthborn angels in some way, shape, or form and use them as leverage to get God to turn over control of heaven and earth by extension. I guess, especially if we're subscribing to our theory here about Wally being God, like, what do you think God/Wally's motivation or thought process was during this? Was it that this was a test, a gauntlet that Supergirl and the other Earthborn angels needed to go? Like, what's your read on that?
Yeah, I think that, you know, when we read about, I think the fancy word they use is like skekina, some sort of Greek word about these earth angels, and that they're manifestations of what humanity should be. And that he even says, like, this is just a kind of a game or a petri dish that I'm doing. I think that he's like, well, I guess the game is up. You know, if what I think is the best of the characteristics of humanity in these angels is giving up, then I guess I'm out. I like the idea that it was. I always knew this was going to happen. This was a gauntlet for this particular Earth Angel to go through. That I think is a great idea, rather than God just being like, I'm giving up.
I tend to agree. Like, I don't think it's God giving up. I also don't think it's God saying like, oh, I can't intervene or I can't save them. Like I have to surrender in this. I don't think it's that either. I think it is this gauntlet. It is this test. I know I've been referencing Supernatural a lot, but another show that I quite liked going back 20 years probably at this point, Eli Stone, which was a short-lived 2-season series at ABC. And one of the producers was Mark Guggenheim. Greg Berlanti was involved with it as well. The producers who would go on to do all the Arrowverse shows. By the way, I got to meet Mark Guggenheim at New York Comic Con. I told him how much I loved Eli Stone. I think he was very pleasantly surprised because I think everyone comes up and they want to talk about the Arrow stuff. And I was like, I really loved Eli Stone. And the gist of that, it was about a lawyer who was receiving visions from God or had a brain aneurysm. Like it was it was open to interpretation as far as like what's really going on here. And I mean, I don't want to spoil too much, but for anyone who ends up watching it, but there's a very critical moment towards the end where he's speaking to a vision of his father, basically. But the idea is he's really talking to God. And he says like, oh, like everything I've been going through, like, is it a test? And his father / God, he's like, a test. He's like, everything's a test. Life's a test. And you, my boy, are passing with flying colors. For any Eli Stone fans out there, you know what I'm talking about. But that's kind of the realm that I feel like we're in here with this at the conclusion of these 50 issues. And I think that's the satisfying read on it.
Yeah. I mean, I think the whole first 48 issues is her being tested. And then, so God saying like, now you have to pass the test, I think is probably a good way to look at it.
Yeah. As far as where everything goes from here. So we already talked about kind of the Matrix piece that at the end of the next arc, at the end of issue 74, we're going to have this merging of Matrix and Twilight, and they're going to form the new Earthborn Angel of Fire. So I would argue as far as where DC Comics left Matrix specifically, I'm okay. I feel kind of good about that. Supergirl, or Linda, on the other hand, she'll come out of issue 74 powered up again after being restored by Twilight, and she'll have her power levels restored. And then we're going to have this whole journey in Many Happy Returns, the final arc of the series, which we're going to talk about. And, well, spoiler alert, but she's going to have this whole journey in an alternate reality where she marries Superman and she has a daughter, but she has to give all of it up to save the day. And at the end of it, after all of these events, she has to leave. And she writes this letter to Clark and she's off the board. Until Rain in Hell.
Yeah.
I guess an asterisk next to the Fallen Angel series, which Peter David did. It ran for 20 issues at DC and then was relaunched under IDW. Again, it was very clear Peter David was intending to continue the story of Linda Danvers, but couldn't explicitly say. So that's sort of its own thing. And I do encourage people to read those series. But as far as canonically, kind of like what we get from DC Comics, yeah, we don't see Linda Danvers again until that Rain in Hell miniseries. Was that like 2008-ish?
Yeah. I mean, it was early on in the site, I can tell you.
Okay. Written by Keith Giffen. And I'll be honest, I've never read it in full. I've skimmed through it. To be honest, I've spent more time reading your reviews of the issues that you did instead of the whole thing. And Linda Danvers only appears in like 3 of the issues, something like that. And when we see her, and I know you wrote it, I'm thinking not so much even of the issues, but of your review. It's like we see her, she's living in Gotham City and she has blonde hair, right? Which was not the case in the book, right? Linda Danvers was brunette and, Supergirl was blonde and would switch between those forms. But okay, maybe she's changed her look in this. But do you want to lay out for people there's not really that much to lay out, unfortunately, but like what happens to Linda in Rain in Hell?
Yeah, I think we never really find out. I think we find her. She definitely has like, I have angel wings and a flaming sword and flaming eyes, and I'm here to judge. And I was so worried they were going to make her Queen of Hell, because of course the whole concept of Rain in Hell was like, who is ultimately going to reign in hell? And I'm like, it would be just like DC to make her a villain, and that would completely stink. But I think she like shows up and then goes, and we never really find out what happened to her. And so I felt like it was a little bit of a cheat, like, oh, Linda Danvers fans, you should read this, except she's not really there, and we never really find out what happens.
Yeah, I mean, again, like the blonde hair, whatever. She changed her look. She's in hiding, what have you. The fact that she had angel wings doesn't line up. right? Because
Yeah, yeah,
we know we leave her in that Supergirl series. She's parted with the angel aspect. So that, I think it's kind of hard to square that. And then, yeah, I mean, she's pulled to hell, and then like that's it. And that's the
yeah,
last that we ever saw of her in the DC universe as of this recording.
yeah, yeah,
Not okay. All right. So, when I had Sterling Gates here, he talked about this whole plan he had for stories leading up to and beyond Supergirl number 75 if he had stayed on the series. And Kara Zor-El was going to die. He was going to do a whole Death of Supergirl story. And then Kara was going to go to hell and was going to encounter Linda Danvers. And then she was going to become a part of the book, and it was going to lean into the supernatural side of things, which, by the way, the audience hears me talk about this all the time. I generally, despite, and this is weird to kind of reconcile, despite loving the television show Supernatural, I tend to not like magic or supernatural based stories involving Superman, but more and more between what we see here in this series that we're talking about and hearing about what Sterling Gates had planned, I'm kind of like, I'm more than okay with the idea of Supergirl as kind of being the magnet for these supernatural type stories. It gives her her own lane, so I'm kind of okay with that. But so Sterling Gates was planning to bring Linda back. Obviously, that didn't come to fruition. I did come across an AMA on Reddit with Sophie Campbell, and if memory serves, I believe she expressed an interest in Linda, but it was kind of open as far as whether and when she would be able to do that. But no, this cannot stand. This cannot be where we leave Linda Danvers.
yeah. I think it's so. Jeff Loeb brings back Kara, and I think that Dan Didio was sort of like, don't ever mention that other Supergirl again. And so there were times that you would say, oh, how interesting that there's like a flashback to the Doomsday fight, no shot of Supergirl in that thing, right? Like they are trying to scrub the brain that character ever existed. And you're right. Then Keith Giffen, who I trusted, loved him, got rest in peace, was like, oh, I'm going to bring her back in this story. And I was like, boy, if there's anybody who can like pull a rabbit out of a hat, it's him. And then, nope. So I do wonder, there is in the Sophie Campbell stuff, this like purple goo that Leslie Lar has made called super stuff.
Yeah.
That I just wonder if there's going to be like, boy, it almost looks like protoplasm. Is this super stuff going to form someone that will ultimately be something? I wonder if that's the way that we'll get back there. But you're right. It's a sad ending. I would almost rather have the downbeat ending of issue 80, and we never hear from her again, than this tease that makes no sense.
Oh, 100%. Well, first of all, on the Sophie Campbell front, I mean, like we've talked about a lot, like she's been mining so much, mainly from Pre-Crisis, but I feel like if there's ever been an opportunity to do something with Linda and do her justice, I feel like this current series is the place for it. So I'm cautiously optimistic, but I agree with you wholeheartedly. I think if she writes that letter to Clark at the end of issue 80 and then she's never seen or heard from again, I'm okay with that. And it's not the same situation, but to me, it's reminiscent of kind of the handshake deal that James Robinson had with DC Comics with respect to Jack Knight Starman, where it's like, that's his character and that's it. And we've only seen like the briefest of glimpses of Jack Knight in the years since that Starman series ended. And I feel like almost always been under the pen of Jeff Johns. And clearly I think there was at least some sort of approval, that happened. So even though not quite the same thing, like I can kind of put them in the same general category, and I would be more than okay with that. Look, like I said, I didn't read the series in full as it was happening. I didn't even read Reign in Hell, so it's not like an objection that I had at the time, but now, like looking back at the big picture of this, like it annoys me.
Yeah, for sure. And I'll say it's because this was a complete arc of this character, a journey that came to an end. And we're used to serialized storytelling. Some characters can end, and if I can lead into this, proto Vertigo thing, the Shade the Changing Man series that came out at the exact same time also has this ending where at the end, he goes back to the woman who's been in love with the whole time. And she says like, coming out of the rain, end. And then it's not like, and then next issue, a new creative team, like, no, that is the end of that character. And I'm happy, right? That is a good ending for that character. And maybe I don't need anymore. So.
Yeah, absolutely. So we'll put that out there into the universe. Maybe there's some justice for Linda Danvers to be had. Because leaving her in hell, like that's not, it's funny. They did that to a character on Supernatural, but they rectified it by the end. So I think there's some work to be done on that front. Last quick couple of things here. I mentioned that they're starting to recollect the series as part of the DC Finest line. Frustratingly, there was a prior line of collected editions that made it through book 4, which collected through issue 43 and then tapped out. And now we're starting again with the DC Finest line, but those are thick, meaty, soft covers. So my hope and expectation is that this new line will continue and we'll get, ideally, the entire series collected. At a minimum, we got to get these first 50 issues collected here.
For sure.
Yeah.
I mean, I was thrilled when they collected the first 9 way back. This was back when not everything was collected in trades and they must have recognized. So when they started to put out the other ones, I was like, maybe this is, finally the appreciation that we're getting. But to not get to 50, to end on 43 is like, what is happening here? So
I know. So fingers crossed. I mean, this is something they could have done an omnibus of something like this, but if I'm on board with the DC Finest line, I do quite like that line of trades. And if that's the track we're taking, great, I'll take it. And hopefully we'll see the full series, or at least those first 50 collected. Obviously we didn't go through every issue, every nook and cranny of these 50 issues, but I like to think we tapped into those major moments, characters, themes. At the same time, anything we didn't talk about that we'd be remiss if we didn't say before we signed off.
The only thing I would say is it was great that Leonard Kirk did the art from 10 as far as the thing went up to Ed Benes, because I think having that consistent look, yes, there was I think a Sean Phillips guest issue, like they were very rare, and so there was just a feel and look that I think also made this such a wonderful, like, intact read.
Yeah, I mean, the art is fantastic. It's funny too. I appreciate the consistency of having Leonard Kirk, but it's also funny too, looking at those early issues by Gary Frank, because it's like now when I think of Gary Frank, I think of everything he's done with Jeff Johns and Action Comics and Doomsday Clock, where he's drawing Christopher Reeve as Superman, for better or worse. Mileage will vary. But it was just interesting to see this earlier version of his art in that first batch of issues. But yeah, I mean, just a really, really fun ride. Again, I know there are some folks who are going to listen to this and this will be their experience with Earthborn Angel. That's cool. But for anyone who is so moved after hearing us talk about it, hopefully we didn't oversell it and we didn't hype it up too much. But hopefully it inspires some people to check it out, because it's truly a satisfying read and very distinct from your typical superhero fare and even what was going on in the other super family books of the time. So I can't thank you enough for joining me. I've really been looking forward to sitting down with you and comparing notes. So thank you very much.
Yeah, and I can't thank you enough. I will talk about this to whoever wants me to talk about it, because I love it so much. So the fact that it's like, oh my gosh, a dedicated episode of a podcast to talk about this, I can't thank you enough for asking me to join you.
No, absolutely. My pleasure. And obviously we mentioned your blog, and I'll include the link in the show notes. Anything else about your site that you want to mention to people?
It's predominantly Supergirl, but I review all of the Superman titles. I talk about conventions and commissions that I got, and really try to touch on all things Supergirl that's out there. There's some side missions about Black Orchid and Legion of Superheroes and Event Leviathan, and every so often I'll take a little bit of a side road. But I try to put things out every Monday, Wednesday, Friday, so you can always go there to read something new.
Right on. All right. I promise this really is the last thing. Last second question that popped into my head. Talking about there's justice to be done for Linda Danvers. We don't want to leave her where we did. I know you mentioned maybe there's this possibility with this super stuff that Leslie Lahr is playing around. But I don't know. Generally speaking, do you have sort of a desired story or reintroduction that you would like? Is there something specific where you're like, hey, this is what they could and should do with Linda?
I think that the tough thing would be if they brought her back, which I think would be great. What is her role? Because she can't be Supergirl, right? So you would have to almost make her like Zor-El-esque, I think would probably be the way that I would want it to be. And I would love for it to be tortured and like in hell unjustly. People don't even remember who she is. She's got to come back. I think that would be the story that I would want. I would not want it to be like she's back and she's gone, or she's back and she's dead. give her little corner of the world to sort of deal with, or maybe not even have her powered, but she could become, I work for the Spectre, or something like that.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm with you. It's like, not only bringing her back, but also like giving her something to do. I mean, I keep referencing, it's so funny because late last year we did like this segment in an episode on new history of the DC universe. And I talked about how like, I'm glad it exists, but it's, like reading an illustrated Wikipedia entry, yet I keep referencing it. Like it keeps paying off. So thank you, DC and Mark Waid. But in the back matter there, they do incorporate Matrix Supergirl. And there's this line about her posing as Supergirl after the original one was killed in Crisis. So it's like, okay, now to my knowledge, I don't believe even in that back matter that they get into the Earthborn Angel side of things. No,
nothing.
But I feel like, all right, maybe there's at least a door open there. And to this notion of like finding something for her to do, we talked about this and we've seen in the current Sophie Campbell series, this little girl gang that has developed, and wonderful. It's great. At the same time, like I would be perfectly fine subbing out Luna Lustrum or even Leslie Lar for Linda. Like my point being, this girl gang idea is in play, and whether we can just add Linda to that or make a substitution, and especially if we are going to lean into the supernatural for an arc, even like there's an opportunity.
Yeah. I'm sure you're going to mention it in Many Happy Returns, but the plan was Blonde Justice, right?
Yes.
With a girl gang. So why not? And if you're Sophie Campbell and you are really mining, right? Lustrum is Wanda 5 and all of these other things. Why not incorporate this run and this character if you're really embracing the entire mythology? So I wouldn't be surprised if we end up seeing her.
Same. All right. Thank you so much. Thank you, audience. I always appreciate you tuning in. Make sure you keep coming back as a Supergirl fan journey continues. And specifically, make sure you come back at the end of the week for a bonus edition all about the next 24 issues of this Peter David written series. Until then, as always, it's about what you do. It's about action. Support the show and receive exclusive content by becoming a member at patreon.com/Anthony Desiato. Rewards include our DCU spinoff podcast, advanced listens, sponsorship opportunities, and more. My sincere thanks to all patrons. Please rate and review the podcast via your platform of choice, subscribe so that you never miss an episode, and continue the conversation by joining us on social media. By popular demand, Digging for Kryptonite merch is available at our TeePublic store. Visit the link in the show notes to get your DFK shirts, hats, mugs, and more. Flat Squirrel Podcast is also home to Lighting the Bat Signal, a Batman fan journey, which applies the signature Digging for Kryptonite approach to the Dark Knight, as well as another exciting episode in the Adventures of Superman, now in its final year covering the classic George Reeves series. Subscribe today. Digging for Kryptonite is a Flat Squirrel production. Key art by Isaiah Simmons and theme music by Dan Pritchard.